Okay, real talk. When I started this class, I didn't think about what we were going to be talking about today, but here we are. It's a bit of a different world than we're in. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about automating analysis, about how to create code that we can run over and over and over again over a long period of time, and it will just update as the data updates without any change in what we're doing. This has become really important in this day and age of the coronavirus. Most of the time when you're doing data analysis, it's a one-off thing. You're just going to do it, and you're going to write the story, you're going to write the report, you're going to produce the graphic, you're going to do whatever it is that you need to do to get your paycheck, and you're going to move on. You'll never see it again. Or it'll update next year, and things will have changed by then anyway, so you're not going to really worry about it all that much. In this instance, we have data that's updating every day. We have data that's updating every week. And these are stories that are going to be going on for a very, very long time. So that's why we're doing this. When you create analyses that update regularly, it sort of changes your way of thinking. You cannot do anything that like hard codes a date in there or filters by a specific thing that's going to change next week. Knowing which time period is this time period and the old time period so you can do percent change calculations becomes pretty rough. I'm going to run through an example using unemployment data because unemployment data is going to be a huge deal for a long time, and we'll flip over to the screencast to do that. I'm going to load up some other libraries here that we have not used in the past. The two specifically that you haven't done are ReadXL and DT. You don't have to load DT or data tables. You can kind of skip that part. Data tables, what data tables does is it makes nice looking tables in HTML that you can search through and sort and do some things like that right in the notebook. It's more important for me, who's outputting a book, for you to read than anything else. But if you install it, that's fine. If you don't, it's no big deal. But you install these the same way we're doing everything else. There's instructions in the book on how to do that. But here are my libraries that I need to load. The one that we're mostly going to be using is this ReadXL, which does what you think it does. It reads Excel files because the Nebraska Department of Labor publishes weekly initial claims data as an Excel spreadsheet on their website. So if we could read an Excel spreadsheet into R and use R to go get it every week, then we could automate that process and not have to worry about it. So that's exactly what this line of code here does. It uses a base R function called download file, which does what you think it does. This is the URL of that file, and you can see it's called weeklyinitialclaims.xlsx, which is an Excel file. And then I'm going to create a name for that file where it's going to save it, and I'm going to give it a better name so it doesn't cause a problem. Now, one thing that may cause you problems with this is if you start this with an untitled file, like you haven't saved it yet, that may cause problems. You're probably just going to want to save this. So I'm just going to save it here from my desktop for now, and I'll figure out what I want to do with it later. I'll just call it automating. So now that that has been saved, it will make my download file relative to where my notebook is, and that's important because then it will know where to find it. Okay, there it is. Downloaded the file. The next bit, we have to go ahead and read it. So why don't I just go ahead and do this first. I'm just going to go ahead and open the file. I'll open up Excel. I'm going to go, it's on my Mac, not on SharePoint. Desktop. There we go. And I thought I had do not disturb on, but apparently Outlook decides that it doesn't want to do that. Okay, so here we go. Here's what we have. And you might notice something right away by looking at this. It is, let's see, the 31st of March, and the state of Nebraska hasn't updated this file since then, which is just kind of sad. It tells you what's going on in their world right now. But this data has years broken up in sheets. So here's 2020, here's 2019, 2018, 2017, so on and so forth. And notice there's some notes on this. There's a title on this. All of that's going to cause problems for us. We need to get rid of those things. We need to have these two things as our header row, and this is our data. So we've got dates and we've got numbers, but we've got numbers with 1,000 separators in them. So we need to be a little bit careful about that. So what happens next is going to look like a lot, and you're going to think, oh my God, I can't do any of that. But every little bit of this is super simple. So I'm going to create a new data frame called weekly claims 20. I am going to use read Excel, and this function is a function that just sort of figures out, is this a newer Excel or an older Excel, and it does it for you, which is great. This is the file that I created with download file here. So I'm going to read my file in here. I'm going to read sheet 2, and I'm going to skip row 1. Row 1 would be that title row at the top. I'm then going to clean my names using janitor. I'm going to only select columns 1 and 2 because that's really all that I need for my data, because remember, here's columns 1 and 2. 1, 2, those are all I need. So I've already skipped 1. I'm only selecting these because these other columns are going to get read in as well, and they'll show up as blanks. So no need to have them at all. I'm then going to use filter here, and I'm going to look for a line in my initial claims column that begins with source. And what this exclamation mark does is it says, wherever you find source, do not include it. So filter things that are not an initial claim with a source is the first thing. I'm just going to do this to save myself some pain and suffering. I'm just going to remove all empty columns and rows using janitor. And then, because those columns have commas in them, I'm going to mutate initial claims to make it a number. Mutate as numeric initial claim. So it just converts it into a number. So that's what all of that is doing in one swoop. And then all I'm doing is repeating this. Now for 2019 and sheet 3, 2018, sheet 4, 2017, sheet 5, and so on and so forth until I have all of the years that I have available to me. There's nothing that has changed in each one of them except for renaming the new data frame and giving the new sheet. And when I run that, it runs all the way through, and you'll notice that I now have weekly claims for each year. 52, 52, 52 observations, 51 in 1 year, just the way the weeks fell, and 11 so far this year, which is clearly not nearly enough. You'll get a little bit of a warning here that just tells you some things, and that's mostly just these blank columns that I stripped out using remove empty that end up getting created. So columns 3, 4, and 5 are empty, and I just strip them out anyway. Then I'm going to use rbind. Rbind is row bind, and it's going to just stack tables on top of each other. So what this says is create me a new data frame called weekly claims and make that the result of rbinding 2012 and 2013 together. So stack 2012 on top of 2013. And then I'm just going to overwrite weekly claims with last weekly claims, this one here, with that and the next year. That and the next year, that and the next year. And then if I run all of this, by the time I'm done, I have a weekly claims file that has 427 observations in it. So this is where data tables comes in handy. If I want to create a quick data table, I can do that, and you can see it looks a lot prettier than your typical R table. This format date just makes this date look something like you're accustomed to. It wouldn't give you a weirdo looking date. So that's all that really does. But I can sort these things. So now I've switched it around. So here's the most recent week available in here, which again is kind of laughable. And yeah, that just gives me a chance to go around here. If I had counties or something like that, I could search them out here. The search bar is not going to be that terribly useful in this case. But it's there if you need it. So I can do the same thing that I just did with the sort by just doing that with a range here. So here is the most recent date that we have, which is the 14th of March. And there were 763 claims. If you've paid attention to the news at all, you know that 763, we left that behind a long, long, long time ago. So I'm going to add a new data frame here. And I'm going to rank these things. I'm going to use a function called minRank, which is going to rank them. And so I can see which, in all of these years, since 2012, 763 is the 306th highest ranked week for initial unemployment claims. Spoiler alert, the week following was number one by about 5 times over. It's been an extraordinary change in how things are happening. So I can calculate that percent change. What's the percent change between this week and this week? And this is where we start getting into this automating part of this that becomes a lot harder. So I'm going to do a pivot wider and change the look of this data so that each week is a column, which means I'm going to have just a bunch of columns, but I'm only using weekly claims 2020. I only want to look at the most recent change. So here's where this starts to become tricky. How do I say I only want to look at this column and this column every week, regardless of what the name of this column is? And where this comes in handy is we use positional arguments. And I'm going to use actually a function called reverse or rev. I'm going to reverse the order of this thing, and then the first column, this one, becomes my new column, minus the second column, 2 here is the old. New minus old divided by old times 100. And between the 7th of March and the 14th of March, there was a 53% increase in unemployment claims. From the 14th to the 21st, it was 1,861%, I think is what it was. If you go through the book walks you through using the federal data and updating that so you can see it for yourself. We can also make some quick graphics out of this. I take my ranked data and I'm going to create a geom bar, a bar chart with the week ending date as my X value and the initial claims as my bar height or the weight. And you'll see I've got a bunch of data in here. So obviously right away you can see there's a seasonal effect, which happens right around January. These are all the people who got let go of their jobs after the holidays were over. It's a regular thing in unemployment data. It's seasonal values. So if you ever hear something called seasonally adjusted, that's what it means. It's just sort of smoothing that out to be more normalized. I can also grab the latest reading on this by just slicing off number 1, and then I can add that. So here's my geom bar with my ranked. I can add another one that is the latest one, and it makes it red with this little bit here. I can add a point to that latest one, and then using ggRepel, I can add a label to it and what that ends up looking like. And the rest of this is just styling. It's not anything you really need to worry about. For this class, if this were a data visualization class, we'd be talking a lot about it, but the point and the line and the labeling, that's what I get. So you see what's going on. I can also write sentences out of this. So I can go and grab the number in my change calculation, which we made up here, the 53.21285. I can store that number as a value, and I'm going to round it off to just 2 digits because no publication would ever use 5 or 6 significant digits. And then I'm going to create something called a sub or a subhead, and I'm pasting together this expression. First time employment claims rose by space, quote, and then I'm going to add this change text, which is this here. Then I add another space percent over the last week, and my separator between these is nothing. I'm just going to leave it blank. If I run that, and then I show it to you,
this is what sub is. First time unemployment claims rose by 53.21% over the last week. Down here in my labels, I've given it a title, and my subtitle is this subhead. And when I run that, I now have a subhead in my graph that is specific to the week. It will change every week as this data updates, which I'm not really confident that Nebraska is going to be updating this data anytime soon. We're going to have to rely on the federal government for that. And for that, you should read the textbook. The federal data has its own problems, but it is also automatable, and you should take a look at it. And it is much more true to more recent developments in unemployment data. So check that out.